is up, youths and viewers? My name is Kiss, and welcome back to KTV Network. Today I am reacting to Resident Evil 3 Director's Cut. Too late, absolutely too late. I'll give my thoughts in the video, but let's go ahead and watch this from the Hunter Project. If I haven't seen the music, man, I gotta pause it though.
Saw the release of Resident Evil 3's remake. This came a year after its sibling remake, Resident Evil 2, which released in 2019. While the reception for both games varied, generally the first of the two remakes in this duo, that of course being Resident Evil 2, was received far more positively, and a lot of this stemmed from the utilization of their respective original releases and the foundations that they set in place for their remakes. The original Resident Evil 3 was very well received by the community and still to this day has a very strong following. There are many factors as to why this was, but a lot of what made the game was the atmosphere the game was able to.
I was about to say that exact same thing. This is where I'm coming in. Resident Evil 3 versus the remake. Resident Evil 3 had a lot of multifaceted aspects to it, a lot of environments to explore, and also the one thing that was it was building up to the anticipation of beating Nemesis, which was the first game, as opposed to the remake, where although it may have been a benefit when for streamers to see Nemesis right away, to see the reactions, it wasn't so rewarding in the long run, because now I don't hear a lot of people talking about it, a lot of people playing it. Sure, there are some gameplays and some people that mod still, but it's just, there's nothing really special about it. There's no replayability for me, at least. Not as much as 4, not as much as 5, and 2. You know, those are entertaining. It just feels, I don't know, it just feels bland to me, and Nemesis doesn't seem as threatening either. So, you know, it's just that they cut corners for short-term reward instead of taking their time and carefully crafting the game. And now if they were going to release a director's cut, I don't know. I mean, sure, you can involve the certain levels that you've scrapped, but I feel like you just have to remake everything again to stay true to the story itself. I don't know. But Jill was a good choice. This Jill was a good choice, even though she reminds me a lot of Alice from the Resident Evil movies.
Create, combining the streets of Raccoon City with a deadly rocket-wielding tyrant hunting you down. It had a diverse set of locations, killer soundtrack and branching pathways, and that's just to name a few. And while the remake followed in its footsteps with many similar story beats, it was clear that Capcom wanted to retcon the story and take a different approach. The development for the remake,
it seems okay, so that makes sense. A retcon, okay,
of Resident Evil 3 started a little after the
kind of like Code Veronica when she whipped Wesker's ass in the first one, and then the second one he bounced back.
development started for the remake of Resident Evil 2. It involved a few members of staff that were involved with the production of the original RE3 and gave them an opportunity to rebuild their vision of how Raccoon City should look and how the events involving Jill Valentine should take place. Due to the timing of these games and their development windows, they tried to make the games more connected, given they take place in a very close time frame, with some events even taking place at the same time in the game's universe. Nemesis would have a bunch of iterations, and given the amount of forms he has in the remake, I can only imagine how many concept iterations they actually had. In addition to that, Carlos was also made more of a universe. Nemesis would have a bunch of iterations, and given the amount of forms he has in the remake, I can only imagine how many concept iterations they actually had.
Those would have been so much better than what we got, because the bigger he got, he became an easier target and less of a threat. They still should have had him at least remain in 2 feet form for quite some time, and just bigger.
Carlos was also made more of a focus in the story, including how he interacted with Jill, and overall the story as a whole was made more focused and streamlined, which was a slightly different approach to what the original was trying to achieve, but I will elaborate on this when we go through the reasons of how it could have been improved.
I will say,
Improving the final build
thanks
of
to
the
this
remake
game,
can be quite a lengthy discussion, as you may or may not have already seen through forums and other videos going over this topic, but for the sake of trying to keep it nice and concise, I will try my best to keep the list short and focused. Starting that list off, we have the exploration.
I will say thanks to this game, anytime I'm playing a horror game, I say don't nemesis me because I don't want to be grabbed with a hand on my head. Like that really I anticipate that in every game for some reason.
The original RE3 offered a multitude of locations, with the most prominent cut locations being the Clock Tower and Raccoon Park. In the remake, many locations are either completely cut, condensed, or briefly seen, and this was very damaging to the remake, given it already had the foundations laid out for it by the original, and it was laid out in
And you had RE2, you had that whole map to utilize, you didn't utilize it
in an excellent fashion. So they just needed to simply modernize the location's aesthetics and modify it to fit the over-the-shoulder gameplay. Many would go on to criticize the release for this very reason, and I feel like this was something they could have easily avoided if they just went with the safe route and made sure everything from the original was there to a decent capacity. Adding on to that exploration point, we have the lack of city. Resident Evil 2 had a large portion taking place in the RPD and then in the Umbrella Labs, so we didn't get to see too much of the Raccoon City streets, which is understandable. Resident Evil 3 on the other hand took place on the streets at surface level, and while we got an okay amount of streets to explore, it can get very old very quickly. There are only a handful of small street
like what I
set
just
pieces,
said.
and even then you feel like you're condensed to a city block, opposed to a massive city full of the undead. In the original game, we did get quite a lot of areas of the city, so not having them in the remake, once again, just took a lot away from the potential that this game had. And as I said before, they
That's
also
a lot of
got
locations.
proper
How many are we
that were
missing?
in the original. The potential
1,
that
2,
this
3,
game
4,
had.
5.
And as I said before, they also cut proper quite a lot of areas.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You have the RPD police station. The pharmaceuticals, where is that? I don't see it. A lot of areas. We've got the subway here. Where? A few areas are missing. I would say the gas station. I don't see the gas station. Was there a gas station in 3? I don't think so.
Areas of the city, so not having them in the remake, once again, just took a lot away from the potential that this game had. And as I said before, they also cut proper locations that were in the original, like the Clock Tower and Raccoon Park, so this only made it worse that they didn't emphasize how big the city actually is and make it more explorable for the player. The main antagonist of Resident Evil 3 is Nemesis, hence why the original is called Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. In both the original and the remake, Nemesis shows up consistently throughout the story, slowly becoming stronger and stronger until you finally fight the fully mutated version at the end. The remake left many fans feeling the Tyrant was underutilized, and of course a lot of the criticism comes from how it was utilized in the original RE3 compared to the remakes. One of the main annoyances came from how scripted Nemesis felt throughout. If it wasn't a set boss battle, many of the segments were chase sequences that were very linear and not something that would diversify as the game progressed. The AI definitely could have been made more adaptive and responsive to the player's actions, making playthroughs more diverse in how events played out for city segments of the game at the very least. The player was never really forced to think on their feet quickly to get away from the monster, and this was something they could have easily changed if they approached it differently. They could have easily have adapted how Mr. X was appearing in the RPD to fit the streets of Raccoon City, and this once again reinforces the point I made before of how they should have opened up the city even more to allow for this type of scenario to take place. So due to the brief and condensed street locations, it also limits what can be done with the Nemesis encounters. A wider and more expansive open city would have allowed for more situations and possibilities with
Would have been better if Brad didn't die immediately either.
how Nemesis targets the player, but once again, the release harboured the simplified streets of Raccoon City, and therefore, the public release version of the remake had this unfortunate drawback.
Right.
One of the biggest complaints for this remake was the cut content from the original game, and of course I have mentioned this briefly earlier in the video, but those being the Clock Tower and Raccoon Park locations. These were two of the most prominent and memorable missing locations that were in the original game, but not in the remake. The visit in the remake is extremely brief for the Clock Tower and is non-existent for Raccoon Park, and it pretty much bears no value to most players in the remake, as you literally just fight Nemesis near the Clock Tower and then it completely skips over all of what the original game covers in that location. And I feel like there's many opportunities throughout the game where they could have implemented the location in a substantial gameplay way, but the direction was clearly heading elsewhere in this case, which was extremely unfortunate. Another missing feature from the original is branching story elements. The original RE3 had various points
I wonder if whoever directed that game got fired.
in the story where the player
Not
is
that I'm
able to
hoping
make
that
a
people lose
choice,
their jobs. I'm
and
just
this would
wondering.
affect how the story was told. And while the effect it had on the story was quite minuscule and not too impactful to the overarching story, it added an additional level of replayability and enhanced the overall immersion. As to why this feature was cut, I think this simply falls back on the development idea of having the story in the remakes more focused and consistent, opposed to having multiple timelines with only one actually being canon, like in the original RE1, 2 and 3. There are some additional features that I think also would have been very beneficial to the game, especially in the way it actually released, as this would have acted as additional content or even replacement content and added additional playtime without changing their intent for the remake's narrative. And the main one that I can think of, and it is quite an obvious one, and that is the Mercenaries mode. This would have been a great chance to create a roster of characters based on their RE2 and 3 designs, and possibly even characters from RE1 like Chris and Wesker, and make it a Mercenaries mode where the locations are taken from various areas of Raccoon City. I don't think I need to explain this point too much, as we've had multiple iterations of the Mercenaries mode so far, and in general it's a mode that
His
always
power
tends
was
to hit
cool.
the mark, even in games such as RE6, where in general it's not got the best reception, but if there is one positive across the board that generally comes up, that is the Mercenaries mode. Back in 2020, following the game's release, we did get an idea floating around of having a director's cut of the Resident Evil 3 remake, as of course many were not satisfied with the content we were given in the base public release. I think a good way of summing up this release is a good game that had a ridiculous amount of untapped potential and was slightly too short as well. And given how long it's been since its release, and with the release of Resident Evil Village and 4's remake since then, it seems like this is something that Capcom doesn't have on their radar at all for the time being. But it
Nah, they completely moved on to 9 and whatever else they're working on. I think 5, which they should be working on Veronica, but sure.
isn't all dark skies. Many are looking ahead to a potential remake of
Which is what I'm going to react to next.
RE5, or even one of the older entries like RE1 or Code Veronica as the next Resident Evil release, not to mention the potential for them to finally move on to the final game of the latest trilogy, Resident Evil 9, and 2020's RE3 has been left behind. Hopefully all those years didn't confuse you, but whether that's a good thing or bad thing that they left RE3 behind, let me know down below in the comments if you would like to see a director's cut
Who knows?
of Resident Evil 3's remake, or if
I
you think
wouldn't
it's been
mind.
long enough and it's
I wouldn't mind, but you would have to discount that price. You know, a director's cut for how much? How much did you cut? How much are you going to put in the game? Huh? 2 hours worth of content, $10. Add it as a DLC. I don't know, something like that. And it just gets it installed into the game somehow. 3 hours, 15. 4, 20, something like that.
better off just
But you know that these corporations are greedy, so they're not going to do that.
leaving it in the dust. And I look forward to reading all of your comments and seeing how the discussion continues. As always, a like would be extremely appreciated if you did enjoy. It does help the channel a ton. And subscribe for a lot more Resident Evil content. Don't forget
Alright. Well, that was the news for Resident Evil 3. Let me know what you think about this video down in the comments below. Let me know what other gaming media you'd like me to react to, or media in general. I'm trying to expand my horizons here. Like and subscribe if you vibe, become a beaut today, and I will see you guys on the live streams soon. Okay, take care of yourselves. Thanks for stopping by.